Here he's going to be talking about blockchain and the business of identity. Chris is coming from T-Mobile. Take it away.
Thanks. So, as introduced, I'm going to talk today about blockchain and the business of identity. I was really appreciative this morning, if any of you caught Perry Ann's introduction in her keynote this morning, talking about how identity is really one of the fundamental use cases that we're going to see emerging over the coming years around blockchain technology. But identity is more than just a blockchain use case. It's really a fundamental human rights problem and dialogue, and we'll touch a little bit later on some of the reasons why that is, but I think identity is definitely one of the most compelling things to be engaged in the blockchain community. Real quick about myself, I am the T-Mobile Senior Blockchain Architect and lead our blockchain efforts. I've been working in the blockchain space for a number of years, and I'm really excited that T-Mobile is as passionate as I am about developing the blockchain ecosystem, and not just to support our use cases, but to grow and develop the community at large. We participate in industry standards, working groups, certification bodies, and other efforts by contributing code to the open source community to make sure that we're not just building solutions to make our business better, but that we're building this community around us as it emerges. Really quick, I work for T-Mobile's Cloud Center of Excellence. Now, T-Mobile is a brand that I'm sure everybody in this room has heard about. I don't have any problems with brand recognition when I get up and talk about the work that I'm doing. But what I do have problems with is people not knowing that T-Mobile is an active participant in the open source and other communities around technology. So I want to invite you all today to think about T-Mobile a little bit differently, not just as that uncarrier, right? The carrier with the CEO who likes to get out there and make bold statements, but as somebody who is an active participant and producer of technology. So we have a number of solutions here on the board that we're producing and working on in the open source space. Jazz Serverless, Conductor, and T-Vault at the top there are platforms that we developed internally to support some of our business processes at the scale that our enterprise works. And we've then turned around and contributed those to the open source community. So feel free to check us out on GitHub or opensource.tmobile.com. Really quickly, I will highlight Next. Next Directory is a blockchain-based identity and access management and role-based access control solution. We'll touch on that a little bit later, but this is a project that I envisioned and have built a consortium of partners to develop with me. And again, we've gone around and contributed this to the open source community. It's something that we are passionate about building community around. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some vocabulary in the blockchain space, right? We all know that this is a world rife with vocabulary. So here's a word, maybe you've heard of it, identity. What does identity mean to you, and what does it mean when you're talking about blockchain? So as I started preparing for this presentation, I did a quick search on the Googles and found that the definition of identity is the fact of being who or what a person or thing is. I don't know, when you hear that, if you have the same reaction I did, I kind of just scratched my head a little bit and went, I don't know, I got to dig in a little bit deeper and figure this out. So let's file that away and just move along and see where we get with the conversation. So I continued my process of looking for more information on what identity is and how to talk about identity and how important that is. And so what is identity? Is this your identity, right? This one or these, right, is the passport, the government's issued identification of who you are. Is that what your identity is? I somehow didn't think so. I continued to dig around and found that another major source of identity information is your bank. It's for a lot of people, that account balance, the money that's in your bank, the validity that they give you is something that identifies them. But that, I also don't think, gets to the core of what identity is. How about this? The physical characteristics that define you, are those what make up your identity? Again, I think we're kind of scratching at the surfaces of identity, but not really getting to the core of the dialogue. So I continued it on and found this. Is this what identity is? Is this what identity could be? Right? right? This is a public key and a corresponding private key. Now, that's a very different representation of identity than those other government-issued, corporate-issued, or born factors that make up your identity. But I think this is no less compelling representative of identity as any of those other things that we've talked about. So let's continue thinking a little bit about identity, and each one of you can kind of make up in your own mind if we've captured that, if we've touched on elements of it, or if we're totally off base. Let's touch on a little bit more dialogue, vocabulary. How about this guy? Do you trust that guy? Does he look trustworthy? I don't know about you. I'm a technologist. He looks a little salesy to me, and no offense to anybody here who's in sales, but I have a hard time trusting salespeople very much. But trust, what does trust mean? And how is that connected to the dialogue of identity? Trust is a firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something against someone or something. Now, maybe a little bit less of a head scratcher, but trust really seemed to me as I dig into identity to be a really important space to touch on. Trust, as I look around the world today, seems to be in a position that it has never been in the past. We have communication at a level that has never been available before previously. We live in this communication age, right? The internet empowered that, as again Perry Ann touched on this morning. People talk about the internet as being, a communications revolution, and that has enabled a real, I think, crisis of trust. So let's explore where we are as far as trust goes. How do we think trust measures out? Here I've got a measure of trust in Europe. And what we see is that, according to a recent study, the average trust amongst others in Europe is a 5.9, 59%. Now, when I was in grade school, which was a little bit longer ago than I care to remember now, 59% was not a passing grade, right? That's a fail. That is not a good position to be in. When trust drives our economy, it drives interactions with one another and allows us to build relationships, 5.9, I don't think is a very good place to be. Now, how about in the United States? Are we doing better here than they are in Europe with our trust? So I found a recent study from Pew Research that looked in 2017 at public trust in our federal government. I don't think anybody's going to be surprised to see this graph that emerges and realize that trust today in the United States is at all times low. 19% of individuals in this study responded that they have significant trust in the federal government. Now, if 59% was bad, 19% is pretty awful. Not a good place to be. So it's within this ecosystem of trust at all-time lows around the world that we've been emerging into this dialogue of blockchain and of identity. And it was in 2008 that Satoshi Nakamoto wrote the white paper, Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And in this white paper, Satoshi highlighted something, that it was an electronic payment system based on cryptographic proof instead of trust. Now that seems like a really important point. I don't know how many of you have read this white paper. I suggest you do if you haven't. It's a pretty quick read. And that really stood out to me, especially understanding now this greater dialogue of how trust is at a crisis point, that we're looking to use cryptographic proof as a replacement for trust. Now, what is cryptographic proof? Well, in Bitcoin, Satoshi proposed the proof of work, right? The proof of work it involves scanning for a value that when hashed, such as with SHA-256, the hash begins with a number of 0 bits. The average work required is exponential in the number of 0 bits required and can be verified by executing only a single hash. The two key takeaways I've got listed at the top of the screen there. The proof of work or consensus as a replacement for trust should be easy to prove but difficult to fake. And that's something, again, that is really important around us as we look around and have these problems with trust. In order to implement a solution for replacing that with cryptographic truth, it must be easy to prove and difficult to fake. Going back then to the conversation around identity and how that intersects with trust today. We've got this guy, he's an individual. You might say he's got a unique identity, right? What is it that really to him is identity? And so I broke this down a little bit. Identity is the fact of being who a person is. Also the fact of being what a thing is. Now, I think that first statement really hit me a lot more powerfully than when I first read that. The fact of being who you are. This is the essence of you. That's your identity. It's not any one characteristic. It's not somebody who says you're this. It's not a passport number or a bank account balance. It is the essence of you. And how does the market, how does the business in the world around us handle trust and your identity? Well, I'll tell you, through digital advertising. That's how your identity is being managed. The market for digital advertising in 2017 was $204 billion. And 2017 marked a really unique point in time. That was the first time that digital advertising surpassed that of traditional media like television. Now, what we see according to this graph is that we expect over the next 5 years that level to significantly increase, and potentially 5 years down the road, we could be at a point where digital advertising revenue is double that of traditional media. Now, this is your identity being treated as a business. And my question for you is, do you trust the people and the companies who are managing the essence of you? Because that's what your identity is. Now let's take a look at that. Nearly 2/3 of all digital advertising revenue in 2017 came through 2 companies. Do we have any guesses out there who these companies are? Anybody? Facebook and Google. Wow, that's really intuitive. I don't know how you came up with those. Google in 2017 had an ad revenue of nearly $96 billion. Facebook had an ad revenue of nearly $40 billion. That makes up nearly 2/3 of the entire digital advertising market. And those numbers are only predicted to increase over the coming years. Now, I don't know how you feel about trusting Facebook and Google, but I personally am a little skeptical of that. When I look at the essence of me, my identity, and allowing them to make that kind of money off of that, that's a little bit concerning. So how is blockchain emerging to address that? What is the business of identity? Well, it's digital advertising, but how is blockchain going to play a role in that in the future? How are we going to use cryptographic proof as a replacement for trust and improve our relationship with potentially these companies and the others around us who are participating in the digital advertising market, like T-Mobile is? Well, I'll tell you. Now, there are 2 sides of the digital identity coin. And first, you have who or what you are, right? That's what we talked about. That's your identity. But on the other side, you have what you can do. It's more than just who you are, but it's what that enables. What are the actions that can happen once you've identified who you are? Now, this is an important dialogue, and I'm going to touch on a couple of use cases in the blockchain ecosystem that I'm passionate about, that T-Mobile is passionate about, and that we're using to support the emergence of increasing trust and increasing your ownership of your identity to react to the world around us as it stands today. Self-sovereign identity is the blockchain answer to that who you are question. According to a Gartner dialogue, Evolving Digital Identity Design, they said that the same way people start physical life by having a birth certificate, people should start digital life with a self-sovereign identity, right? Now, we see that self-sovereign identity really gets to the heart of that fundamental human rights problem that I talked about. This is the opportunity to take who you are, your identity, and own that. Don't allow a government or corporation or anybody else to control the information that makes you you. That is really important. Now, in the first time in history, we have the ability to do that. We have the ability to say, I am me, rather than to have somebody else say, you are you. That's why self-sovereign identity is the most important technology in blockchain. And we'll touch on almost every solution you ever use in the blockchain space, and will drive a lot of what happens in the future with your identity, who you are. Now, who's leading this dialogue? Sovereign and Hyperledger Indy. There are a lot of players in the self-sovereign identity space, but here's one. We have good representation here in town, around the country, and they're driving a lot of the dialogue around what happens. They're participating in removing that control from governments and corporations, and through self-sovereign identity, fostering variety in every way. And this is really important to me as a part of that dialogue of owning who you are. Self-sovereign identity enables a proliferation of identity information, a proliferation of many identity networks, right? We have, in addition to Sovereign, Civic, Life ID, and Uport, and any number of other participators in the self-sovereign identity movement, and a wide variety of identity verifiers per network. It's taking away from one company or one government the ability to say you are you, and distributing that across our ecosystem of identity verifiers. Now, T-Labs happens to be a founding steward of the Sovereign Network and is one of those verifiers who's participating in this effort and saying, you are you, but not because we say you are, but because we as a community say you are, and because you have provided the information that says you are. Self-sovereign identity also fosters a proliferation of identity through the potential to have many identities per individual, right? In addition to many identity networks and many verifiers per network, you have the opportunity to represent yourself in as many different ways as you see appropriate. And that's really important. So it's through the work around self-sovereign identity that I think we're touching on the who you are of blockchain. And so I just really want to take some time to highlight that today and reflect on how important that's going to be over the coming years. Now, what you can do is the other side of that identity coin. Now, this is a solution that I've been working on for about a year now. Next Directory is an open source, blockchain-based identity and access management. This is a big part of what you can do. Now, at T-Mobile, we manage identities for our customers, and we say, you know, these are the things you can go have this line of service attached to your identity. But we also manage it for our employees. We have tens of thousands of employees around the United States, and it's important for us to understand and be able to accurately represent to our auditors and those people who allow us to build trust with our community that we know who our employees are, we know what they can do, we know what they have access to, and that we're responsibly managing those processes. And every business out there in some way or another uses identity and access management tools and infrastructure to support their business. So we've built this as a project that was important to making our business better, increasing the transparency, reliability, and trustworthiness of our identity information. And we've contributed it to the open source community. We worked with Intel and other partners to build this from the ground up as something that could be an open source product that anybody can go pull off the shelf, install in their environment, and use to manage their identity information. Or in a large enterprise environment like I have at T-Mobile, plug it in and integrate with your existing directory service. Add characteristics that aren't available today, approvals, integrated change management, logging, auditing, and make those a part of the dialogue of managing identity. Make your business audit ready. You can check out the code or join us in the chat. Again, Hyperledger, Sawtooth Next Directory is where you'll find that. And you know, I like to just kind of close by highlighting that this is part of a community, and open source is something that I'm really passionate about, and passionate about contributing the work that we're doing to the greater ecosystem around us. So Next is not just a standalone product, it's not just a product that's been contributed to by a number of organizations and has been donated to open source, but it's also built off of open source technologies, right? Linux and Node.js and RethinkDB, these are open source technologies in and of themselves that we're using to build this solution, a hybrid architecture, blockchain solution to make your business more capable to handle the identity and access management challenges that they see. So again, think about T-Mobile a little bit differently than you did. Think about us as a participant in the open source community, a technology leader, transforming wireless through technology innovation. Thank you. Yeah, one or two questions.
Okay. We've got a little bit of time for questions, so we'll take one or two now, and then obviously Chris will be available for the rest of the conference.
And please use the mic if you have a question. I think we can capture it in the audio that way.
Hi there. Microsoft just, their identity team just published I guess a blog post a couple weeks ago about standards, the role of standards and innovation.
Yeah.
Wondering where you think that fits. How does that fit when an organization like that that's got so much at stake with identity is kind of throwing a hat in the ring?
I think that's hugely important, and Microsoft is actively participating in a lot of the standardized efforts, as a result of a long body of work that's led up to that blog post, right? We are a close Microsoft partner and work really closely with them in a lot of efforts around blockchain projects. So the work that they're doing through the Decentralized Identity Foundation and other efforts is really important. We've got a number of standards bodies that are participating in leading the growth of this technology as an industry rather than just building solution-specific products. The World Wide Web Consortium's Verifiable Claims Working Group is playing a key role in what's emerging right now with verifiable claims and self-sovereign identity. Other groups, standardization bodies like what's happening with Hyperledger Project and the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, are helping take those technologies and build an awareness and an ecosystem of companies that conform to those, that can build solutions on top of that. And by having those standards in place, it allows us all to kind of know the rules of the road that we're participating in. It makes it easier. I think Microsoft blog post, to kind of paraphrase, said that they want to take some of the heavy lifting away from building these solutions, solve some of these really sticky problems so that when you go out and want to participate in digital identity, you've got a clearly defined place that you can go do it. Now, you're always welcome to step outside of those boundaries, but it's important to bring the community with us, and the work that we're putting in as enterprises and startups both participating in these standardization efforts helps bring the whole community forward.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks for your time.